Hey everyone, Connor Bryce here. I've got a series of music tracks I'd like to talk about today. Unfortunately, I probably shouldn't because the game has not been released yet. So I'll just leave that there as a little bit of a teaser. And we'll come back to that at a later date. But for this episode, I wanted to just show you what I'm working on right now. So this is going to be very much a work in progress. I've got a few parts left to play in and then a whole lot of tweaking and mixing left to do. But this is a show about the process, so I'll just put this out there, warts and all, and keep in mind that it's a work in progress. So I call this track Mountain Railway Adventure. And I'll go ahead and leave it there. The tune ends pretty much the same way it began, solo horn melody on the way out, and then there's a little bit of a tag at the end with some new material that I just haven't played in yet. So overall, this is about long soaring melodies over these rhythmic background textures created through interlapping, interleaved or overlapping figures. So for example, looking at the strings here, here's the first thing we heard. And to go in and dissect this a little bit, the first violins have this sort of Zimmer-esque figure, just outlining a C minor triad going to an A flat triad. Second violins, even more simple. They're only playing a single note repeated, but it's an important note because this is the only note that changes between those two chords, the G of the C minor chord going to the A flat of the A flat chord. Then the violas and cellos are playing this sort of spinning arpeggio. And finally the basses just adding, where are the basses? Oh, I'm way up in the upper register, jeez, don't know how that happened. Anyway, the bass is just adding this, this little push at the beginning of each beat. And, you know, hearing it all together, it all just sort of blends together and creates this nice sort of churning sound, which I thought was representative of a, you know, an old steam engine or something, so hence the title. So this figure also shows up in the woodwinds. and then a little bit later, continuing with a more reedy sound as the oboes and bassoons get involved. And I'm really happy with the way this turned out in the strings. LA Scoring Strings or Less has some really great spiccatos because they're very sort of light and agile and precise, so they're really good for this sort of thing. I'm not quite as happy with the way the woodwinds are, and that might be partially related to the samples. I'm just using the special edition here, so I don't have as many velocity layers available as I'd like. But it's also I think due to the fact that if you look at some of this string material, I've got a lot of sections where you're sort of pushing, there's sort of a dynamic shove into the next chord. And of course, this is an example where I actually changed the line, spreading out the voicing here into the next chord, so the top parts go up and the bottom parts go down, and just a nice little sort of diversion from the repetition. But I haven't really done any of that kind of thing in the woodwinds, either changing the line or just giving it that extra dynamic push yet. So there's a lot I can do with the performance. And I think it's also worth pointing out that if I were to give this to a set of live musicians, I don't think I would ever give this to a single player because they would get mad at me and they would probably pass out from lack of oxygen. So what you would do instead is give them maybe 2 bars at a time to really focus on, and then they would sort of hand that line off to the next player. So even if that was just like literally the same instrument, one flute player handing it off to the other flute player, there you get a little bump when the handoff occurs, and a slightly different sound coming from the other musician, and it just helps keep that variety going. So I'm not quite as happy with the woodwinds as I am with the strings on this figure, but I definitely have some things in mind to improve it, so I'm not too worried about that. Let's talk about the brass a little bit. And you know what, I'm feeling charitable, so let's start with the good and go to the bad. I really love Cinebrass horns, and I don't even have the Pro version yet. This is Cinebrass Core, so again, you know, just like with the woodwinds from the VSL Special Edition, I don't have quite as many layers on some of these things as I would like. But this melody is just coming off really nicely. I mean, listen to that fifth. It's like that's what horns were made for. And you know, Cinebrass just makes that sound great. This whole section here, the idea is that the melody is played once in horns and flute. That's in C minor, and then it goes to D minor, so it's up a whole step. And then you have the melody moving from the low strings, cellos and basses, all the way up through the string section until the melody is soaring above the entire orchestra. And the horns became like a really important sort of supporting part for that. So yeah, that's awesome. Really enjoying how that is turning out. So no complaints there at all. Now I also gave the brass some of these light sort of dancing rhythmic figures, just briefly, just to see if they could do it to my satisfaction. And I don't like this as much as the strings and woodwinds, but it seems to work okay. The trumpets are more precise than the low brass here, which is that's kind of to be expected. That tends to happen in real life too, where the low brass tend to be a little bit more blatty, and you don't necessarily want to give them the most agile figures. But I do feel that this is a little bit too much on the blatty side with this trombone and tuba, because I would like to extend this out to be similar to the bass sort of double taps at the beginning. But it just starts to get a little bit muddy there, you know, and I can finesse that to improve it. But I think it probably will just sound better with just that single note. So anyway, these parts are doing okay. I'm not thrilled with them, but they're acceptable. And let me just take a moment here to say I'm a brass player. Like this is my main instrument here. If I can fit it in the frame, this is a trumpet. So I'm super picky about brass libraries. Just, you know, I've met string players who are super picky about string libraries and all this stuff. It's you know the sound so well that you're just super sensitive to anything that's just not quite right about the virtual version of it. So when I say that a brass library is doing something sort of acceptably or tolerably well, like that's high praise for me. This is like if a Vulcan tells you that your performance is acceptable. Like that's the best compliment they can muster. So, you know, don't worry about it. It's fine. So, Cinebrass it's basically the first brass library that I haven't hated. I have not tried Hollywood Brass, which I hear great things about, simply because I would also need another computer to run it. So that's probably not in the immediate future. But there is one thing that just makes me rage about Cinebrass, and that is the low brass are missing a legato articulation. Like what you see here is not connected to Cinebrass. This is just the way I have Cubase set up with the, what do they call it, expression maps. And right now I just have a sustain patch playing these notes. So this is a good sound in some ways. It's punchy and growly and really aggressive, but that's not what I'm going for here. I want this to be like a rich, smooth, legato, sort of low brass choir kind of sound. And I just can't figure out how to make that work without the legato patch. Like it's weird to me because Cinebrass is really proud of their horn and trumpet legato, and then for the trombones and low brass, they just don't have one. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. But anyway, the first thing I'm going to do is try to mellow this out a bit. See how closely I can connect these notes without getting a smear, like two notes are being played at once. And then I'm going to drop this down and raise the volume up so I get a mellower sound. And just see if that's kind of acceptable, and if it's not, I'll just have to find some other solution from another library, I guess. So anyway, dear Cinebrass, trombone legato, please. Moving past this section, which is a little bit muddy, we end things with a kind of a fanfare. And then we have new material here with this melody is actually, it's kind of the same material that we've been hearing all along. So if you listen to this original melody, we have three notes going up, three more notes going up. Then we move up and sort of come back down on a scale. Three notes up, going up and back down a scale. So that's exactly what's happening here. Three notes up, a little nudge up, and then back down a scale. And of course all this is happening sort of in half time on this slower time scale, so everything is stretched out and very sort of relaxed. So that's just kind of a way to introduce something that sounds new but still feels very grounded in the material that you've already heard. And then underneath all this, we've got contrabassoon, cellos, and basses playing sort of a sinister tango, I guess. I don't know what this is. It just seemed like a cool idea. I'll probably make these articulations consistent, either by shortening the contrabassoon so they're all short notes, or if I were to give the strings a spiccato instead of a pizz articulation, I'd be able to also give them the long notes. And that's probably the way I'll go. You know, more of these long, slow things, just, you know, falling action after the climax that we've just had. Stretching out and gradually diminishing the orchestration until we fall down to almost nothing. And then from here, goes back to the top and the melody plays again on the way out. So yeah, that's pretty much as much of it as I have ready right now. Have these few parts to play in at the end to bring it all together, and then tons of tweaking and mixing to do. And actually, one more little bit of difference I can point out. The melody here ends on a ninth, D over the C minor chord, and then the strings pick up that note and have a slightly different figure here, just based on taking that D and sort of running with it. And then, you know, some placeholder stuff at the end that I need to finish. So that's what I'm working on right now. When I finish the track, I'll be uploading it to my SoundCloud, posting it on my website. You can find the information for those things below. And in the meantime, I'll be working on some new music, and we'll bring you some of that next week. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.